it can be hard to sort of distinguish what's important and what's not, because you can find yourself just writing pages and pages and pages and send it out and people are just completely lost.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Growth Mentors, the podcast where we share snackable growth hacks, strategies, and best practices in how to drive maximum marketing impact and grow your bottom line. I'm your host, Matt LeBlanc, and today we're going to be talking about how to bring structure to the creative process to make teams work more efficiently together, to make everything work more efficiently. So whether you are on the brand side or the agency side, maybe you're a project manager looking for some tips, we are going to be focusing on some really key areas of the creative process with some very actionable things that you can do to sort of clean up your processes. So here to help us do it is the Senior Creative Project Manager at Jump 450, my friend, Jasper Guarnaccia. How you doing, Jasper?
Doing really great, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Excited to talk to you. We're going to be diving into three popular areas of project management here: note-taking, asset sharing, and creative approvals. So we've got some really actionable takeaways for everyone to sort of apply to their own creative process in these three areas. Jasper, let's start with note-taking.
Yeah, absolutely. People hear note-taking and they say, oh, I do that all the time. There is a bit of an art to it, especially with when you're taking it during a meeting. I know that at least for a project manager, usually we're driving the deck and typing and doing a million things at once. But there definitely are some ways that you can be a little bit more effective in your note-taking, and especially when you need to translate that later, which we'll get into.
Yeah, let's dive in, because I feel like, as a creative director here for a long time, you and I have worked really closely together in this way. And, I'll say this for yourself and all of the incredible project managers that we have at Jump, but it's oftentimes like a magic trick, the way that we will leave a meeting and all of a sudden really detailed notes come through the channels and you're like, wow, how did he take those and also share them so quickly, clean them up and all of that kind of thing. So it was kind of like you said, we all take notes. I think we all sort of think we're good at it, but maybe you've got some sort of tips here on how we can improve that process.
Yeah, getting into the actual note-taking, it can be hard to sort of distinguish what's important and what's not, because you can find yourself just writing pages and pages and pages, right, and send it out and people are just completely lost. So there's a few things that I like to sort of pick out and how I sort of take notes. The first one I'll call trigger words, and I don't mean it in that way. Trigger words are things that I notice the clients say, either they mention it a lot or they mention it with emphasis, something that is important to the message that they want to get out. When we're in a brainstorm or something like that and I'm taking notes, if the client says something with inflection or says something in passing that's like, oh yeah, the CEO really liked blah, 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 you just take that little, spark and you put that down. Not always an immediate actionable item, but can be very, very helpful down the line, especially, when you are making new creatives for different campaigns and different times of year, remembering, oh, this is something that they like to talk about in the spring. I'm making that up.
Right. And, so trigger words is one thing. So what's the sort of keyword? And then maybe you can fill in some more of the details afterwards, but the trigger word sort of makes you remember the sentiment. And then I think you're almost moving into something else that we were talking about, which is priorities. One thing that I have noticed that you do often is not only do your notes include action items, which, you think of as this is the really important part. This is why we're taking the notes, right? Is the action items. But I also see you and a lot of our PMs do this, where you're very intuitive in terms of the client seemed to feel strongly about this. Don't forget this little piece. They just seemed passionate when they were talking about it. That kind of thing, where it's it's very helpful to the team for those ideas to sort of get spread out.
Absolutely. And, you sort of have to think of it as nice to haves versus needs to haves, and making sure that you distinguish those, because it's always going to surprise and delight when you bring up something that a client said, again, offhandedly, maybe they didn't know that they were putting an emphasis on that. And then they hear it back in, or they see it in an asset that we create for them. Of course, there's always the priorities of this needs to launch by this date, whether or not it's a Black Friday, Cyber Monday sale or Valentine's Day, any, sort of seasonal needs.
Sure.
Those are going to take priority. But
Right.
then there are these sort of, like we were talking about, intuitive trigger moments where you can say, and sometimes you can incorporate them into the priorities, because you can say, okay, this is an ad that we're doing for Black Friday. They also said that they wanted to focus more on saving money during this time. Bring that in. But making sure that, always adjusting dates and always keeping in the back of your mind, don't forget, they said this thing, but in the front of your mind, you're like, okay, we need this by this date.
Sure. Jasper, talk to me about creating cheat sheets.
This is one of my favorite things to do. I love a cheat sheet. I love just like a one pager. People don't read. They love bullets. So I like to create these cheat sheets to share with the internal team, share with the media buyers, with the creative team. It just sort of keeps everything in one place. And so that everybody who's doing their job doesn't really need to worry about like, oh, this needs to be there. Oh, I can't remember. Does this need to be there? And I basically use it as what you can and can't say and what's important and what's not important. Oftentimes clients in the beginning will send, brand guidelines about like, oh, we can't say this or we can say this. However, during the relationship that you have with the client, things come up. I'll just bring up, fintech, compliance really gets, this needs a disclaimer whenever you say this. This needs a subscript, but only in these cases. And having that all in one place so that it's just like the creative directors know, okay, we can't say this. We have to say this. The graphic design team says, okay, well, if we put this statement here, I know I got to bring this disclaimer in and drop it at the bottom.
Right. And, as someone who's worked with you, this is, it is super helpful because lots of times, brand guidelines and things like that, they can also be really lengthy documents. So having that sort of like quick, short list that we can keep referring back to is definitely a big time save.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jasper, let's move into sharing assets. What are some sort of best practices or strategies that we can take in sharing assets?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said before, one of the biggest superpowers or magic tricks, whatever you want to call it, of the project management team is organization. So I always do a folder hierarchy. We have a drive where we save all of the assets that we make and the assets that the client makes. And so I always do a consistent hierarchy, and it's something that we do across the company. It will be something like the, Meta, Google, do it by the channel. And you break it down from there. Video assets, static assets, copy, and then logos, icons, logos, and then you break it down from there. The biggest thing is once you have that folder hierarchy is making sure that everything is named consistently. We here at Jump, we use Monday.com. We have an ID, an auto ID for every asset that we make.
Right.
You have to put that in the name. The client might not have that necessarily, but you have to put that in the name. Coming from the client, and one of the things that the project management team, especially the creative project managers, is renaming a lot of the times. And the client, they have their own system that we have no idea how they, organize things on their side. So it can come to us and just like a big old file, a big old Dropbox folder, and we don't know what's what, and the naming is different and the dates. So consistency is the key.
Right.
Making sure that it's not necessarily, putting it on the client. Hey, can you always include this little ID number? But it could be something as easy as like the name of the specific product always is consistent. It's always spelled the same way. It's always sort of like written the same way. And that sort of leads to the consistency, the organization. To me, that's how you really know like what assets you have, what assets you don't. One of my biggest pet peeves is sending assets that we can't use. So knowing what we can and can't use is crucial. My advice is just telling the clients, like, if you can't use it, please don't send it to us. The worst case scenario is we don't want to be using anything that we're not allowed to. And sometimes a client will just send us a Dropbox link.
Yep.
And it'll just have everything. It's, oh, everything's in there. And if they don't have a folder in there that says do not use or archive, we don't know what we can and can't use.
Right. This is something that happens more often than you might think, where it's kind of like, hey, this new relationship working together and the creative teams are syncing up. And, you know, like you said, you send over a really big folder, big Dropbox link with a ton of stuff in there. And then nobody on the other side has sort of like gone through to sort of see, which, you know, we're going to get into creative approvals in a minute, which is really important in terms of that nothing gets run that, you know, shouldn't get run. But it really is so important to look through and see, are we able to use all this stuff? Because what ends up happening is, you know, if you're a brand working with an agency and you give the Dropbox link or whatever it is, and then we start making stuff and it's like, well, now we've invested time and energy into making these assets and we're finding out that we're not even actually allowed to use some of this footage. So
exactly. It's beneficial to both sides, you know, because we don't want to be spinning our wheels making something that we can't use, and we don't want to be delaying it because we're creating something with assets we can't use.
Jasper, one more question in terms of the folder hierarchy. So do you always start with the channel name being sort of like the broadest folder?
Typically, that's how I do it. You know, you can also break it down the opposite way, and that this is totally a preference thing. You can do video, statics, copy, and then within each of those, break it down by the channels. I find that especially for our media buyers, to make it way easier, if they just need to click into one folder and they know like, okay, all this stuff in here is mine, then it just like solves a lot of headaches, saves a lot of time, as opposed to, okay, I want a video. Ooh, I want a meta video, you know, that kind of thing.
Right. Do you think that it's important that you keep the folder hierarchy consistent? I guess we're working on the agency side, so I would say between clients, but I you know, hope that these insights will be sort of, you know, valuable holistically to anyone who's sort of listening here. But do you feel like if you're sort of assigning a folder hierarchy for one client or project, do you think it's important that you keep that hierarchy consistent across others?
100%. Consistency is the key. And again, you know, if it's your preference as an agency to do it, you know, video, and then within video have the channels, that's great. But you got to make sure that that is followed throughout.
And we find this in so many different areas of what we do, but like these little organizational tips, these, you know, consistency among naming conventions or folder hierarchy. There are small things to do. They're annoying. Most people pass on them, I feel like, but they really do save so much time. Let's move into creative approvals here.
Great. Yeah, I mean, this is where the, you know, it can really take some time and a lot of back and forth. And this is where a lot of pain points can arise. So, you know, doing a couple of things can really save a lot of headaches. Biggest thing, I think, is to really just have one person or one, you know, entity approve, maybe two at most. But you don't want to hear things from this person and then from this person and then from this person and then this person asks a question to this person and we don't know what we're doing. So getting it to really like one approver, whatever level that they are, usually more sort of like boots on the ground kind of person rather than a you know, CMO. But just having that be sort of like, when this person says it's approved, it's approved. When this person says edits, it's edits. And, you know, the reason that I also bring up two is oftentimes, you know, again, with fintech, you'll have the marketing team, but you'll have the compliance team, which needs to review everything. So that always, you have to build that into the approval process and to the approval time.
Right. And for people who have a hard time narrowing it down to one approver on the brand side of things, a lot of times what we sort of suggest is, if you have more people internally that need to approve a piece of creative, have one person that collects those notes on your side, and then that person puts the notes into the place to sort of communicate them. Because what we're really trying to prevent is, well, Jason went in and put in his notes, but, Denise doesn't have time until Wednesday. And then Dan forgot that he had to do it entirely. And so we've already started our notes and now Dan's jumping in to add his. So it's like, it gets out of hand really quickly. So just having that one person can really, really speed up your creative approval process.
Exactly. And, Dan might have a comment that conflicts with, Joe's comment. And then we're already halfway there. And then we're waiting around for Joe and Dan to figure out what they agree on.
Right. So aside from the one approver, talk to me about the notes, where we get them, when we get them, all that good stuff.
Yeah, like you were saying, we want to get them all at once, all sort of like, this is what we have. And of course, there's like, when we go back and forth, you might see something that you didn't the first time, but making sure that you get everything in sort of one chunk so that we can sort of action on all of them and know this is what we need to do. That's key. The other huge thing is making sure that all of those notes are in one place. And when we say one place, we don't mean text, we don't mean Teams, we don't mean, Google Hangouts, we don't mean Slack. We at Jump, as I was saying, we use monday.com, and we have a lot of client facing boards that are different than our internal creative boards. So
right.
Oftentimes what the process is that we give the clients access to this board that has all the creative, what we call pulses, but we'll call them tasks for this, all the tasks in there. And they need to be putting the information directly into Monday. And in my head, and oftentimes we'll say this to the client, if it's not in Monday, it doesn't exist. If there's like a one-off comment in Slack,
right,
I don't have any problem saying, this is a great comment. We're happy to make this change. Can you put it in Mondays just so that we have a record of it? And so that we are only looking in one place, and all the notes are in one place. We're only looking in one place. We're only hearing it's all about just having a consistent, sort of singular voice that is projecting everything to us to make it way smoother.
Exactly. And the other thing I think that you sort of touched on there was that all of the notes are coming through at once. Again, that maybe seems like nitpicky or small, but it's actually really not, because you watch a video asset that the team is working on, and you have some big ideas and you put them in, and then you're like, that's it, I'm done. Go do those changes. And then we make those changes, and then you come back and you're like, you know what? Also, I didn't like that opening, so do that too. Collecting all of the ideas at once, like let's make always hopeful that the next version will be the last version,
I love, yeah, exactly. Because it's, again, mutually beneficial. We don't want to spend time delivering something that the client is not going to like. And, we don't want to waste our time because we can be, really optimizing like what we deliver to the client and making sure that they get the best possible product from us.
Yeah. And just sort of to reiterate, all of the tips and things that we're sharing today are really intended not only for people on the agency side, but also people on the brand side. Talking through these topics, there are things that people on both sides can really do to sort of speed everything up, make things more efficient, which ultimately just strengthens relationships.
Exactly. And if I may, something that I work with on my side is sometimes the client uses a program that's not Monday, that I don't, and they have their own process. Thank goodness that we live in a time where there's a lot of integration between these programs, and most like Slack, Monday, a lot of these like programs will work together. But really it's about finding that balance and that synergy, and how can we, find a common consistency. The theme of this, I feel like I've been saying it a lot. How do we find a consistency across the brand and the agency?
Excellent. Jasper, you just have one more point here. It's in terms of I think you rewriting a lot of client notes for the team. Can you just kind of talk us through that point?
Yeah. So that's a great call. When we have this big list of feedback that is somewhat consolidated and coming from one person, each one may have its own little voice. For example, if the person who's delivering the information to me, like here's the whole list, if they're just copying and pasting what person A, person B, person C said, they might all be talking in a different way, have different sort of like ideas of what they want. So I then have to translate that. And me knowing my team, me knowing my audience is crucial to that and to how I rewrite it. And sort of a rule of thumb that I do, and I don't do this in a pejorative way. I don't do it in a demeaning way or anything. I really try to spell it out like I'm spelling it out to a child or somebody who does not work in marketing at all. It's not meant to be condescending. It's just a way to be super clear and just making sure that everything is broken down. I love to also, I'll take a screenshot. If they make a comment that's a little vague and sometimes it's hard to explain in words, I'll take a screenshot, I'll draw on it, I'll point to it, I'll annotate it. There's a lot of great programs. Frame.io is great about this, where you can really annotate like each individual frame like of a video.
Yeah.
But being as specific and detailed as possible, so that my job is that none of the team members have to come back and ask, what did you mean by that? I want them to just focus on, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to just churn this out and I will take care of the translation part.
Awesome. Jasper, thank you so much. We've got so many great tips in these areas today. Just to sort of reiterate a couple of things in note-taking, use trigger words to sort of collect quickly and remind yourself of the messages. For priorities, we're looking for action items, and we're also looking for those maybe more intuitive human pieces. What did the person seem to feel strongly about? And also cheat sheets, big asterisk by cheat sheets. These can be really, really helpful. So look for places to use those. In sharing assets, consistency seems to be the overarching lesson there, but in folder hierarchy, in your naming conventions, and then a pro tip, just make sure that you're not sending assets that we're not allowed to use, right? That's just saving everyone's time. And then in creative approvals, one approver, all the notes at once, all in one place. That place is not Slack or another messaging platform. If you are project manager or the person sort of organizing the creative process, sometimes rewriting those notes so that they could be given to a child is a really, really helpful way to pass them along. This has been the Senior Creative Project Manager at Jump 450, Jasper Guarnaccia. Thank you so much for your time today, Jasper.
Thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate it.
And if you are listening and you are interested in exploding your own digital growth, you can get in touch with Jump 450 in the link below in the description. That is www.jump450.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more weekly episodes. We'll see you next time.